I just want to kind of first ask in general if you can tell me a little bit kind of how this project came to fruition. I mean, you both wrote the screenplay and you directed the movie. How long have you kind of been working on this, and what did the process of like bringing it to life really look like?
Uh, well, the origin of it really goes back to kind of the origin of me as a director. I was actually in my very much younger days. I was an actor, and I loved musical theater. So I was always acting, doing musical theater. And I actually remember very vividly the moment I changed kind of course, which was I was in Jesus Christ Superstar, and I was playing Judas, and I'm in the middle of my big giant, death number at the end, and the director decides they want to put 15 dancers in front of me while I'm doing my big death scene. I remember having a conversation, going, why? Why are we doing that? And they couldn't really answer it. And I remember in that moment going, I need to do that job. I can't do this job anymore. And I literally changed my career trajectory after that show and decided I want to direct. And my first directing was Romeo and Juliet on stage, which I ended up directing, I think, 4 different times over my career
Okay.
on the stage. And it
Mhm.
was always interesting when I was directing on stage, much as I adored the play and adored the text and adored just everything Shakespeare's ever done. I have to be honest that you would find moments where you're like, I just don't think the grown-up characters or the parental characters are as explored as they should be, or this relationship between these characters. And so I always felt that there was a lot of stuff left outside the confines of what Shakespeare could fit in. And
Sure.
I always felt as a director on stage, gosh, I wish I could find, there's so much more here. It's so clearly relevant. I got to figure out how to do this one day. And it just kind of kept lingering.
Mhm.
Up to ages later, I'm now making movies and television. And I was still struggling with it because I always thought there was something cool there. I remember watching Shakespeare in Love going, I should have thought of that. Stopford was brilliant. Why didn't I think of that? So I kept trying to find an angle in. Anyways, I remember sitting with my brother Evan, who's a songwriter, who wrote all the songs with his partner Justin Gray.
Sure.
I was wrestling with iambic pentameter in general, thinking if I'm going to make a movie, it just can't be iambic pentameter. I know that that's crazy. It's Shakespeare, but it's tough to get through. It's just, let's be honest, it just is. I know we all go, it's lovely, and it is, but it's vegetables.
Mhm.
I remember asking my brother, why do you think Shakespeare did iambic pentameter? And so effortlessly, he just said, because that was the poetry of their time.
Mhm.
That's interesting. I said, what's the poetry of our time? He said, pop music. Now, granted, he's a big pop music writer, so of course he was speaking about himself, but he drilled down deeper and says, think about the young folks in this world. Think about kids, 15, 16, 17. They're all listening to music all the time, not just to block out the world, but because it's speaking to them. It is their poetry. That was really the leaping off point. And that was about 10 years or 10 years ago.
Okay. Wow.
So we then started, I always laugh with my brother, when writing a script or directing something or editing something, it takes forever. And then, he will walk into a recording studio and like 3 hours later come out and go, I just wrote Beyonce's Halo. How do you do that in 3 hours? It's a different business. But crafting songs, boy, is that tough. And it took years and years and years. Any great stage musicals, take years and years and years, not just for the screenplay or the play for the stage.
Mhm.
So we worked the songs forever and ever and ever until I finally had my kind of greatest revelation during all this period was that Shakespeare didn't come up with one single idea in the play. It
Mhm.
is all based on other source material, 7 different authors who tackled this story over hundreds of years, going all the way back to historical records that show that there was families of these two names with these characters at this time in this place. But Shakespeare based his play on source material. So I started looking at all the source material, and it was so much more story to tell. It was the thing I've been searching for practically my whole career. And that really found it and launched it.
Sure. That's so interesting. That's so interesting. And it sounds like kind of took a while to get there too. You were working on it for 10 years. I'm sure that was kind of a long process to put it all together. And I'm sure like research and everything, did you have to like kind of go back?
Constantly.
Yeah.
I read every piece of material you could ever find. I had to get translations in different languages, but it was still trying to find, you know, you're doing Shakespeare. And so there are people, and I talk about this all the time, who are obviously, purists to that text.
Mhm.
It's a little funny, I think, sometimes that people get, frustrated about the purity of the text when really what Shakespeare has done is create material that's meant to be adapted. And if you look at Romeo and Juliet, which I do, I say it all the time, it's literally performed in every city, in every state, in every country, on every day around the world, but they're virtually all adaptations. You look at something like Baz, that's Venice, California, not Venice, Italy. It's cars, not horses, and it's guns, not swords. Of course, that's an adaptation with iambic pentameter. Others were set in World War II. Others are set in Mars. So there's something about those themes that I think Shakespeare meant to be re-explored and looked at. And when you look at the canon of Romeo and Juliet's, it's all about exploration. And so I always found the exploration was key, but I also needed it to be a place, excuse me, that if you are a purist, you would still get to the end of it and go, well, they didn't do that and they didn't do that, but I understand how they got there and why, and that they can respect why we got there and understand that we're paying homage and a love story to these themes, not disregarding any of it because it's crucial stuff.
Sure. No, totally, totally. That makes total sense. And I think you pulled it off so well too.
Well, thank you.
It kind of jumps into what I was going to ask you next. Is one of the things that you changed about the movie, obviously, is just the title. Instead of Romeo and Juliet, Juliet and Romeo. I'm kind of curious, was the inspiration there like to kind of help I can never say that word, make it different from other adaptations?
So it absolutely was, and yet, boy, titles are always tricky. But titles about arguably the most famous title in literature, maybe with the exception of the Bible. I mean, you'll be hard pressed to find something more well known than Romeo and Juliet. Mm. When I began, I always called the movie Verona, because I thought it was about not just this group of people, but a larger group and a larger context. The problem when we were talking to people about that is most people just don't know what Verona is or don't remember exactly what it is, or certainly don't make that connection. So then we started going down the road of, well, then it should be Romeo and Juliet. And I just felt, but that doesn't say anything about how our approach really is different. So we kept trying to find, well, what says it's Romeo and Juliet without saying it's Romeo and Juliet? It's the thing you think you know. It's not the thing you actually know. And it was actually while working in editing, and I was playing with the title of Romeo and Juliet, and I happened to have the digital files on my computer. And I don't even know why I did it. It wasn't even intentional. I just somehow flipped the letters and suddenly thought, if I actually brought it on screen as Romeo and Juliet, so they go, oh, right, it's without getting any more detailed about why, it simply says it's not what you think. And that really was what we're trying to go. Now, of course, people will say, and there's truth to it, that putting Juliet first is talking about it's a different approach to the Juliet character. And it absolutely is a different approach to the Juliet character for 1,000 reasons. I think one of the biggest reasons, and it's probably the thing that most purists of Shakespeare will argue with the most. I understand the argument. I don't necessarily agree with the argument about the age. Many people will say, but Juliet was 13, he was 14. And that may very well have been true at a time in 1301 when lifespans were 30.
Right.
So it's not the same 13 or 14 as you are today. And even in Shakespeare's time, when he's writing, let's say 1595, like likely when he wrote it, as much as I adore Shakespeare, he didn't have the same view of women in the world as we do in 2025. And so just trying to take the themes without changing the period, but make them understandable, I think it's totally appropriate to say, well, then what is young today, which I think our characters still are for today, which is entirely different than 1301 because we don't live in that world. And, when talking to young people, like, we wouldn't do that. So we wanted it to be, we thought the themes are so important. They have to be embraced, but the distancing of some of those things like age would have made that impossible. And I felt in terms of adaptation land and approach, I thought that was totally reasonable to understand lifespans were different. Views of women's rights in general were different. And this story should be different. And if Shakespeare were writing it today, I bet you it would have been.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Totally. And that kind of, I'm sure, ties back into the pop music of it all too, because again, that makes it modern day. It kind of makes it for a 2025 audience. And I think that approach is really cool. As far as kind of the music and choreography goes, it's also just really well done. Like, even if it was Romeo and Juliet, like if this was just a normal musical, I'd be like, yeah, I was into it. I really loved it.
That's great.
So I'm kind of just going off that. Kind of how did that kind of like process work for you? Like making the music choreography in these scenes, like you worked on this for 10 years, and I know you
Yep.
had other people working on the music and everything. Did that kind of come first? Like, were you working on the music and then making the story
So,
around it, or was it the other way around?
so I was actually just talking to my brother yesterday about this, and it's so interesting because I really can't find a direct comparison that approached it the same way. And then, look, I know every musical says we're doing this kind of live capture, or we're doing this kind of thing, and those are all fabulous and true. There was something different about our approach, though, and what I mean by that is, yes, we had to create pop music that lived by itself on the radio, so you could be driving in the car and enjoy that. But that's not what's actually in the film,
Mhm.
because in the film, I always say there's two kinds of musicals, and I really believe this. There's the kind of musical where the milkman is singing, and the milkman knows he's in a musical, and his cow knows he's in a musical, and
Right.
it's almost like it's so self-aware. It's fine, not my particular cup of tea, not
Mhm.
the kind of musicals that I particularly love, because I think it's a little distancing. The other kind of musical, which I do think this is one where we're really expressing the inner struggles, the inner feelings, the inner dreams and hopes, as if it's truly inner monologue. And I always kind of say this point that, when we meet Romeo and Juliet in the church, right, and they're suddenly singing, which is a big song in the film called Beat the Same,
Mhm.
I don't think if we actually entered the real church, they'd be singing Beat the Same. I think
Right.
two young kids in the church probably doing other things. So
Mhm.
the intention wasn't they're really singing on a horse. It's how did it feel?
Right.
So once I knew that that was crucial, it couldn't just be passive. Let's create songs, put them in the bank, and then when we're ready to shoot, let's just do it. Because you'd have songs that play out over a 12-minute scene. And I
Mhm.
need the first verse to come in, then it has to become score that has to keep adding, then it has to return to song, then it has to go back to score, has to keep evolving. So it's not like just here's a song playing in the background or even a song they're just going to dance to. It was so integral to the architecture of the whole piece because we were doing live capture as well. And because I knew how I wanted the music to integrate across the board, we'd be sitting there on set with my brother Evan and his producing partner Justin on location with their mobile recording studio, and I'd suddenly go, oh no, it's taking the horse 6 seconds longer to get from there to there. I need the song to be opened up 6 seconds. Guys, you got 20 minutes. And they'd be running back and doing that. All of which only got to the place where we finally had a piece. And then we had to figure out, well, what is the orchestration of that piece in and around it? So to the last moment, to the last delivery, it's not just that music was there. There is no movie without the music. There's no music without the movie. And then at the same time, you could lift the music up and it could play. It was a fascinating experience. I've never done anything like that. My brother's never done anything like that. I don't know anyone that's done something as collaborative where one absolutely had to inform the other at every step.
Uh,
But I can't imagine doing it any other way now.
yeah, I'm sure. Interesting. And I think I have to say I loved all the musical numbers, but I think my favorite one was the I Should Write This Down with Dan Fogler.
I love that. I love that. Now, I'll tell you a funny story about that, which is, some of these songs literally had been written 10 years ago, some were 5, 6 years ago. I Should Write This Down was not written when we shot. So I knew that we had the great Dan Fogler, who had worked with before, and I had a wonderful kind of character arc with him, and I knew what we were doing with the great Derek Jacobi.
Mhm.
But I felt because of the kind of way we structured the movie, where it was really other than Rebel Wilson, who sings Mask I Wear and really feels like one of the other folks at the time, I keep the songs away from the grown-ups and really let it be more the language of the younger cast.
Yeah.
And yet suddenly Dan Fogler and Derek Jacobi are going to sing a song. So I was whenever I'm shooting, I have a kind of a live edit going so I can see as much as kind of landing. And I felt that there's a part of the storyline that wasn't quite landing. And I was trying to find where it could happen. But I also knew I had this great Dan Fogler, this great Derek Jacobi. What could I do? And I remember walking to my brother and saying, Evan, what we really need is like our master of the house from Les Mis. Like,
Yeah.
if I'm going to do something with that, it needs to be the song that we all wait for. And then we get to like, oh, in Hamilton, when the king comes out, you'll be back, right? So I always felt, let's go with pure departure, and therefore it has to just be a balls out showstopper. And you're going to have the great Derek Jacobi, who I want to rap, and the great Dan Fogler, and then yes, with choreography we brought in. So it really was kind of a piece of its own. But I literally went to my brother mid shooting and said, I have an idea for the song. This is what we want. We're going to shoot next week. Go.
Wow.
It was great that you love it. So I adore it so much.
Oh yeah.
It was the last song written for the show while making the movie was quite something.
Yeah, that's crazy. That makes it even cooler, really.
Yeah.
It's yeah, that one was a lot of fun. I really liked that. So we won't publish this till after the movie comes out, which means we're free to talk spoilers and everything here. So I do kind of want to talk about the ending a little bit, just because I think that's where
Yes.
you take the boldest, biggest swing and
Yes.
rewrite it so that they live. Can you tell me just a little bit, kind of what went into that decision?
Absolutely. So I will say, even for people who are seeing this after the movie has come out and all the rest of that, there are two other films in the franchise and in my story. It's a 3-film arc ultimately. So where it ends at the end, I can't promise you'll be as happy. I can't promise you'll be sad. But so there's more story to tell that may take us in different directions. That being said, there wasn't a single performance that I directed on stage where I didn't look at the audience and I could feel it palpably that there were people there saying, I wonder if they live this time. Wouldn't that be fun? Like you could see this. I know what this story is because the character, of course, says it in the opening lines. They're gonna die.
Hmm.
So you're
Yeah.
watching this, but I do believe when you do that show right, there's a suspension of disbelief for a moment where I think people go, maybe this time, maybe this. And I always thought, well, maybe this time. Now, I think that is, as you said, an enormous departure. But when I went back to the historical reference points, what I discovered was that again Shakespeare based it on other material, which based it on other material, which based it on historical records. The only place historical records came from at that time were the church. The only character at that time who would have kept historical records was the friar.
Mhm.
When our particular story had a very specific desire for what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And so the idea that the friar said, okay, if history needs to know that this is how this story ended, then that is what history will know. It'll be placed in the church archives forever, which appears in our film. And that's all Shakespeare ever would have had access to.
Mm.
So he wouldn't have known what had happened.
Yeah.
So I felt from a historical standpoint, nobody can say I'm wrong. No one can say I'm right, but nobody can say I'm wrong. But more importantly, it allows for two things to happen. One is for an audience who the whole time has been leaving kind of that history of the door and going, gosh, I hope it fulfills that for them because they're caught up in this adventure and the characters themselves, I think, which is probably a bigger departure than just to live or to die,
Mhm.
was the choice, frankly, to kill oneself, right? Which Shakespeare did. It's a very important topic and challenging topic, especially for young people today.
Yep.
And yet, when you look at the why, those two characters felt in Shakespeare's play they had no way out.
Mhm.
And our mission always was in this story, there is a way out. It's your way out. It's your world. It's your life. And if that's the story I was going to tell, I couldn't then revert back to that because that would have been completely inconsistent. So once I made the choice of who I thought these characters were for this audience today,
Mhm.
their future was written different perhaps than Shakespeare did, but perhaps not different than the church did.
Yeah, that's so interesting. This could be the most accurate like version of the story
It
for all of them.
absolutely could, and no one could say that that didn't happen. And when you look at history, which is what our second and third film do, to kind of track this incredible battle with the terrible Pope Boniface and his battle against the church and state,
Okay.
were these fabulous characters from Dante Alighieri, all these fabulous historical characters who would have been in this time, in this place, caught up in these events. And that's where our story ultimately goes to the birth of all of Italy and Europe.
Oh, sure. Wow. That's what I was going to ask you about next because you end with that to be continued in
Yes.
with the book too. I didn't know there was going to be a third one too. So
Yes.
that's so exciting. I can't
Yeah.
wait to watch now.
Yeah, me too.
Wow.